Namaste. My name is Preeti Upala, and I am a global thought leader and a multimedia personality. Welcome to my podcast, The Preeti Experience. Join me as I explore some of the most fascinating and crucial issues that affect our world today. I take a unique global perspective on these issues, and the very foundation of my insights is humanity and spirituality. I'm Preeti Upala, and welcome to the Preeti Experience.
So yeah, I feel like India has, started to try to make more of a connected relationship with the United States. You had the whole Modi tour with Trump here in the United States. People were excited about that. India is a developing country. It's a powerhouse on the global stage now. I don't know how participatorial it is on like these global organizations, and we can get into that. Just kind of like India's relationship with the U.S.
Yes.
Where you think it's going to go, as well as the participation kind of on the global economic stage with these organizations.
Yeah. So it's this COVID, if it's shown us anything, it showed us our fault lines, right? And I remember before this pandemic, there always used to be this debate, right? Is it going to be China or is it going to be India that is going to be the next emerging superpower? And I'm sure a lot of people would have backed China at that point, for many reasons. And now I think people are really thinking twice, because they realize that the one thing that they didn't factor when they were thinking about great powers is morality and responsibility, and how are you a stabilizing force in the world or not? And we don't see that with China. China has very sort of sinister, imperialistic aspirations. It has always had them, and India does not. It's never had them. That's just how it goes. And it's just a miracle that even sort of 5,000-6,000 years later, that it's not just still standing on the world stage, that it even exists as a stage, but it's actually more powerful than ever. And now it seems to be emerging. I think it needs to take a more of a leadership position in the world. It is a force to reckon with. Everybody knows that, and it knows that it's capable too. And I think it can be very fair in ways that the West can't be, because of that spiritual ethos of the country. Now, India, sadly, after independence, I think after 1,000 years of being colonized and invaded, it obviously that it didn't trust the world that easily, and specifically the Western powers, the UK and the US. And right after independence, it sort of got closer to the Soviet Union, and it also adopted this non-aligned movement where it just wanted to kind of be friends with everybody, and in some way that made sense. But the problem is the US and the Soviet Union obviously are adversarial, and you just found a situation where the US kind of moved away from India, and there were many times where it sort of sided with the arch enemy Pakistan, right? And then India was kind of closer with the Soviet Union. So these countries kind of went their separate ways. And then the U.S. foreign policy towards India and towards the subcontinent has always been incredibly antagonistic to India. So it's only recently that all of this changed. I think George W. Bush Jr., you may be surprised to know, was actually the first president that decided that this relationship needs to change, and he was very instrumental in changing that. And
a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't know about that. That George W. Bush Jr. had a pretty big role to play in that. Almost, it kind of to me reminds me of with China, right? In the 70s, yes. Mao had just died, and Nixon had wanted to capitalize on this opportunity with China, who at the time was only its GDP must have been maybe 56 million or very low GDP compared to the United States at the time. So, yes. It was kind of seen as a very pitiful developing country that the U.S. and its kind of monopolistic multinational corporations can go there and do something there, which that's exactly what happened. China was shopping around saying, we're open to do something for the global economy. We want to participate. And I guess you know, they kind of twisted themselves into a pretzel to convince the country, hey, this is communism, but it's the Chinese style communism. We're going to open these areas, you know, call them like, you know, I don't know what they nicknamed them, but they're like little social economic areas that developed from the 70s until now to be like these mega cities where, you know, commerce can be done, businesses can make dealings with other global businesses. So it was amazing. I don't think we can undersell or underestimate how genius that was from China's part, right? But like you said, with this COVID situation, this might kind of hamper some of their bigger plans, and we'll get into what.
Because it actually unveiled their sinister plans to the world. I mean, I know in the subcontinent people are very familiar with it, you know, and we'll talk about this later, you know, with the BRI stuff. But the US, I speak to a lot of people here. They've never heard of BRI, and it's like the most scariest thing in the world out there right now. But getting back to the India's position as a global power, the world is waiting for it. Certainly the UN is, and just even the great powers, because also they see India as as their kind of challenge to China. Like America would view India as we need to pal up with India because so we get some more power against China, because India and China are adversarial to begin with anyway. So when you combine US and India together, that's a formidable combination. And even Russia and China are not really that friendly, even though they're both obviously communists. They've had their own issues, and Russia and India are on very good terms. So it's an interesting conundrum, but I think everybody wants to see India step up. It has been doing it. I think it needs to be forgiven that it didn't step up all this time, because we just have a very, very bad memory of being screwed over, taken over, all of that good stuff that comes with the 1,000-year history, right? But honestly, it needs to leave our memory fields now, because I think this is a new India. This is a new leadership, a new government, new young people. The people who live in India right now, they don't have memory of the pre 1947. The median age is 26. These are all new people who are even clueless about their own freedom struggle and even history, I would say. But so, we have nothing but support for the US. I think also the current administration is obviously very complimentary to the Indian government. They get along, the leaders get along. I think for the first time we're seeing this sort of US government and administration take a firm step against this radical terrorism, which in the past they had not done. So that is pleasing to us, because we've been the victims of that for a long time.
Yeah, well, what really interests me is, this seems to be an opportunity that the administration and just the U.S. in general is taking to detach itself from the reliance that we have on China. China had, been one of the biggest manufacturers of everything in the world, really. Mm-hmm. But in this pandemic, we saw them we saw ourselves kind of tied to the hip with China, because all of our medical equipment, all of our emergency, utilities and masks and all kinds of stuff, syringes, it was all produced in China, not here in the United States locally. So there was a mad dash panic for us to figure out, okay, we can't just hedge all our bets with China. We have to start detaching ourselves. And, this isn't to say anything bad about China for me personally, because China does a really good job of bouncing back. If you remember in 2008, during the crisis, they saw that as an opportunity to look inward into their economy, and that really rose up their middle class. So, they really capitalized on that. So I think that they'll be fine. I just do find it interesting that now India is kind of posturing and positioning itself as, a global player that can not necessarily replace China, but can definitely provide an alternative for the U.S. for businesses.
I don't think anybody wants to see a replacement. Like, that's not a replacement that the world needs. I think India represents a different kind of global leadership and a different kind of cultural ethos, quite frankly, that the world needs. and has not appreciated and acknowledged, because this kind of ethos has been there for 6,000 years or longer probably. But the world, of course, they're just too obnoxious and
Oh yeah,
busy
no, I
doing other
agree. Yeah,
things
and I'm not trying
to
to say
notice.
that
And
India.
we no no I'm saying, what I'm saying is we haven't done a great job at also kind of popularizing that either. So I think the fault lies with both parties, like and I think even we are, getting some kind of raising our brand a little bit and realizing that this is the time when we need to speak up, because I think for a long time we didn't speak up, and we've always been there in, you spoke about institutions, like, India has contributed greatly to the UN, to the peacekeeping force, and we've always had great diplomats who have taken up all these important world causes, and we've had fantastic Indian sort of not politicians, but diplomats who have held great positions with all these institutions. But it's like we never connected the dots and kind of made it full circle. And now I think we have a chance to do that, and we have a chance to kind of say, what, we contribute a lot actually, and we need some respect, and also we can take over from where others have failed. I think it needs to show the world that it's actually very capable and responsible, which I believe it is. And
Yeah,
but
and
this is on. Yeah.
by no means am I trying to say that. Well, I think that's smart. I think that's smart on
Yes.
the country to do that. And if you have leadership that's willing to kind of take
Yeah.
those steps and initiate that, I think it's great. Every country should have a strong postured position on the global stage. And in no way was I trying to say like India should be the new China, where multinational corporations can go in
Yeah.
and take advantage of the lower wages and all of that. I think that's bad no matter where it happens. No matter who does it, if the U.S. does it to China, the U.S. does it to India, or
Yes.
like we're seeing now, if China's doing that to other developing countries and regions like Africa, which we'll get
Yes.
into here. We'll wrap up on that. But
Yeah.
to address your point on these organizations and stuff like that, yeah, I think, look, India could be a good partnering. I mean, look, we have a lot of, everybody has interest globally, and as
Yes.
much as I do embrace nationalism and protectionism more so, the title nationalist has kind of taken a negative,
It's
has
taken a
adopted
beating.
negative connotations. So
Yeah.
more of a protectionist, I guess. Where you should bolster your manufacturing. I guess I disagree with the leftist liberal take that these jobs are gone forever and we're never getting them back. I think that's a very defeatist mentality, and we saw with this COVID that there are opportunities for us to reinvigorate manufacturing at home. And I think some of these other countries who have been successful, you'll see a pattern. They had that infrastructure in place to do so. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, I guess we should touch on the India becoming more influential in these
Yes.
big global organizations,
True.
but also some of the
Yeah.
detriment that they bring, right? Because they get a lot of bad reputation, I think rightfully so. So go ahead.
India gets a bad reputation from
No, I mean the
whom and
global
what
global
exactly?
organizations.
Oh, sorry, those. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, they do. I mean, after we're finding out how reckless they've been with this situation, putting a lid on things and being not transparent at all when they had all the information in the world of exactly what was going on, they really supported this Ethiopian chairman who happens to be part of the Ethiopian Communist Party and was a member of a party that has an atrocious record back home for like human rights abuses and all sorts of crimes, right? So, but they propped him up because they just found a more sort of camaraderie with his point of view, and they knew that that this man would be little soft on China if anything were to go wrong, and well, it did. So, but last week there was a vote, and a unanimous vote, and China got booted out. I mean, I guess their term was up anyway. So talk about like timing, that this happened just while all of this thing is going on around the world. But
Right.
everybody voted, and now India is the new chairman, executive chairman of the WHO, and it takes over at a vulnerable time. However, I think we are in good hands, and the person who is going to be the executive chairman is actually Dr. Harshvardhan, who is an actual medical doctor for a change, and like the first one, and like the other one, I mean, and he was the union minister in the government. I thought he was going to juggle both, but I came to know that he's actually going to give up his union minister role, because that's a full-time job, and taking care of, I think it was science and technology that he was in charge of, but taking care of that for 1.3 billion people as well as the WHO is a bit much for anyone. He was incredibly respected and liked across party lines and just in general. So it's sad that we won't be seeing his leadership for India, but there'll be other good people who take over from him. But I think the world is in good hands, and he's an actual medical doctor, and he clearly India has done a good job with its own situation. At least medically they have done a good job.
Yeah,
So,
I think no one can argue that hey, look, this guy
Yeah.
is not only coming from a region, an area, a country
Yes.
that has handled the pandemic amongst the top 10 countries, I'm sure.
Yes.
So that's just good practice to put someone
Yes.
in place like that comes from a country that has handled it well. And number two, it's an actual doctor, which was one of the things that was infuriating, right? Is that the previous holder of this position wasn't even like medically
He
qualified.
wasn't a medical doctor. The
and
Tedros guy,
the
oh my
vetting
God.
process
It's terrible.
yeah, many Americans don't even know like what these organizations stand for, what they do.
Yeah. It's
or
like
their
a popularity.
practicality.
I mean, it's honestly, it's like high school and musical chairs, and it's like a popularity. It's like a beauty pageant. It's really atrocious. Like I have.
Well, our
very
money's
little-
going. Our money is going
Yes,
to fund a
billions
lot of this.
go, and the U.S. funds a lot of these organizations, and these people really think that they can screw you. The U.S. It's even the UN does it, right? So, on the one hand. I think if the U.S. wants to withdraw funding, it can do that. I think other countries, including India, has made statements that these institutions are failing us. The answer is not to not for everybody to withdraw funding, but I think we need to strengthen them, not financially, but we just like the policy and processes and all that. So they will strengthen them. And I think if the WHO is stronger and a legitimate institution, it's actually better for the world than just to shut it down, because then we'll have nothing.
Well,
is
I think
like
you're
some
right.
kind of
I think
global
you're right.
standard. Yeah.
I think you're right to an extent. Obviously, pandemics like this are not going to be over. There's definitely going to be a repeat of this in the future, and who knows how bad that'll be. So we need a global response, considering the fact that we're all globally connected at this point.
Yes.
But the influences, and then that's what really I think terrifies many Americans, especially those liberty-loving Americans who say, you know what.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know who is influencing, what is influencing, and how is it influencing these entities that are operating with our tax money, that are, putting out these kind of rules, these measures, and these kind of standards that our country is supposed to follow, but we don't know, like, if they're coming from like a biased position or what. You talked about how this gentleman who was just ousted had very shady ties to his home country's Communist Party, who was very kind of sympathetic to the Chinese government, their mission overall. My biggest fear is that we're very unaware of the fact that China is developing all kinds of routes, all kinds of routes for their products, their supply lines, their oil, everything in different like regions of the country, mainly Africa. Getting access to all of these ocean points and ports, mining different areas, and they're all doing it in this kind of facade of bringing infrastructure to these areas.
Infrastructure and development,
What is the name of the plan that they're titling
great.
it?
I'm so happy we're talking about this, because I've been talking about this for a couple of years at least. And you mentioned that we are not aware. You know what? Americans are not aware, but trust me, a lot of other countries are, and very worried, and we have been worried for a long time.
What really makes me upset too, Pretty, is that on the left, on the liberal, which I am, I'm pretty far left, and part of this progressive. But what frustrates me is that it's like, you got to contextualize things. You got to open yourself up and look at like how the rest of the world looks at things, and they don't look upon China's involvement fondly, just like they don't look upon our involvements fondly.
Yes,
you have to make, and I feel like they bend themselves over backwards, the liberal left here, to do apologetic gymnastics for the
Yes.
the Communist Chinese Party
Yeah.
and a lot of radical revolutionary Islamic
Yes.
organizations.
There
Where
you
I'm
go.
like, the
That's
rest
the
of the
biggest-
country
yeah.
isn't with you. Even leftists around the world aren't
That's
taking that
true.
same position. Why do apologetics? But yeah, go ahead and tell us the name of
Yeah.
this kind of plan
So-
and what it's all about.
Yeah, the greatest fault lines with the left are definitely these sorts of things and kind of overdoing it on with these kind of bad actors. So this project used to be called One Belt, One Road. It was called OBOR. Now it got changed to BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and essentially it's the new Silk Route. These people are crazy. They basically want a route all the way from China to Europe. I think that's the plan.
Yes,
and
that's
going
the
through
big one.
Asia.
That's the one I've been
Yeah,
hearing
going
about.
through
Yeah.
Asia and Africa. Now, the good news is it's not feasible.
Well, it would connect.
people were-
It would connect London to Beijing or something.
No, but yes, but I mean, it's not feasible on. Forget the route itself. The economics are not feasible. It's just they will have already starting to run out of money. These projects that they set up are not working in so many ways. They're not working, and so the African problem is one thing. And in Africa, forget about infrastructure and development. It'll never
Well, the
get done.
governments there are so unstable.
They're
some of them.
corrupt too. So I think the Chinese have met their match in Africa with equally corrupt and sinister dictators. So I think they kind of deserve each other.
Well, it just seems like these empires don't learn. This
They
seems
don't
like a fourth
learn.
wave of globalism.
Yeah, this is like the fourth time that and these African people, they have elections. A lot of them are like fair democracies. They
Yeah.
keep electing these corrupt, ruthless dictators. Like, what is wrong with you? Like,
Well,
at
what's
some
to
point
say
you
that
just have
some nation in Africa just says, you know what, we don't like this. There's a new government that comes in. Of course, China's going to want to protect its interests. So what are they going to do? Invade that country, go in there and enforce, this sovereign country to fall in line because they were, nice
Yeah.
enough to build them a bridge. I see a lot of problems, like you said, like
it's
feasibility.
like a failing idea, but also the financials don't work out. Now, for me, from my perspective, Africa wasn't my concern. My concern was Southeast Asia, because the starting point of this BRI is actually from China. The road starts going through Afghanistan, Iran, and so on. The issue is it has to go through a part, like to get to Iran and Afghanistan, it needs to go through a place called Gilgit and Baltistan, which is actually Indian territory, which is illegally occupied today since, I don't know, a good 50, 60, 70 years, I think, a long time.
Yeah.
And by Pakistan, and they call it POK, Pakistan Occupied Kashmir. That area is actually Indian sovereign land, and they actually have a right. Even the UN recognizes that as Indian sovereign land. So the
Yeah.
thing is that India now has this case where if this, because they haven't started really building that stuff
Yeah.
through that part. When they do, if they do, they may not even get there because they're failing. But if they
Right.
do, then we have a case that we could actually legitimately take.
Well, the tensions
to,
might
like-
rise too.
Yeah. They have already risen. I mean, just a few days ago, like the other border, because
Mhm.
India does share a border with China, is a Sikkim border, I think, and we've had issues there. So basically, we have military people on like the Indian has their force on one side of the border, and the Chinese have the other ones. They never encroach. They've never crossed, but.
Yeah.
I think China tried to come in, and Indian army or military, I guess, stared them down and didn't budge. And China detracted. Actually, they've never they've never done well in their border conflicts with India, with other countries.
So
they
let me
annex
just mention
whatever.
something,
Yeah.
because this is very interesting to the audience. That obviously, so a couple of things here, at least from what I know, India and
Yeah.
Pakistan a long time ago used to be, I think, one area,
Yes,
one
70
country.
years ago. Yeah.
Right. So that's an important context there.
Yeah.
Both are nuclear powers, I believe, Pakistan and India.
Yes.
China does share a border with India, and recently in the news there has been contention over an area. I don't know if it's the area we're talking about, but there is like this.
No,
this-
it's not. It's not POK. It's the area of the BRI part it's on the west coast. This is the east coast. This is the border that India shares with China. I
Right.
think it's it's a region called Doklam, and
Yeah.
we've had problems there before. And every time we've had a problem there, China it sort of tried to make a move, but they got stared down by the other army, and they actually they retracted. They knew that they couldn't make
Yeah.
an inroad. So good for India for sort of putting their foot down, and I think it's great. Like that region.
You think this is
again,
something that'll be will it be hashed out in the legal courts, like the global courts or whatever, as far as
Well,
like the road they're trying to build?
The Doklam area is just a border. It's a legitimate border. It's not like illegally occupied territory or anything like that. The POK area is illegally occupied by Pakistan. So,
I mean, I'm sure there's
yes.
courts, right? Or
Well, the CJ would be the one, I think, at some point. I think that the BRI is actually like a good kind of precursor, because if they try to build stuff there, that's when we can really take it up a notch and go for them. If they're not building or doing anything there, look, we've had 70 years to claim that land back, and we've had the worst kind of governance that has never had the balls to really get back their own land. Like,
right,
really,
that's kind of
what
my
it
point.
comes
That was going to be my pushback.
But
Is like, you guys had 70
this-
years to claim that,
Yeah, well, but guess
and
what?
I'm sure there's some kind of democratic entity that runs that area or that decides, hey, yeah, we want China
Well,
here.
it's not democratic and it's not legitimate. It's actually, that area is infested with tribals, militants, all kinds of like jihadi elements. Not good. It's not like they don't have normal people and civilians there. It's just a lot of bad actors there, which actually makes it easier for army to go in and take it and even like get rid of whoever
Yeah.
is there.
And I
they're
think
all
that's the
bad
worry,
guys.
right? That China might just kind of strong arm the area, maybe corrupt the officials, or
Well, they
something there.
fund a lot of the bad jihadi stuff in Pakistan, because Pakistan is a broke nation, so it gets a lot. The only country that financially supports and funds Pakistan is China. US used to do it for 70 years, but I think this administration kind of really cut off a lot of funding, because I mean the conversation was like, you have to stop this terrorism. I mean, I think the world is realizing that this kind of terror nurturing is not just a problem for the South subcontinent and Southeast Asia. Every jihadi attack around the world can be linked back to these training camps that are training and giving refuge to these bad people. So I think the world is realizing that it's not just India's problem, it's the world's problem, right? So we need to I don't know why either the US doesn't do this, or I mean India could, but they would get.
Well, that's
they
the
could
big
rightfully
problem,
do it.
right, Priti, is that the United States isn't without blame here. We funded the Mujahideen way back in the day.
Yeah,
We've been guilty
but
of this.
remember,
The Saudis
the
have been
jihad-
funding
yeah.
a lot. So go ahead.
But this jihadi problem has been around for 1400 years. I think this is what people forget. Like, there was somebody posted something on Facebook. It really irritated me. He was trying to make a comparison to COVID, and like I think he was actually trying to kind of be apologetic to China and saying, don't blame China for COVID. And then he put another photo there saying, same thing happened in 9/11, where we were asked to, be worried about Muslims and Arab world and jihadi and all this. And I just let I let it rip.
Well, that kind of
really
goes back to my point, like
yeah.
I was saying about the liberals and doing this apologetics. I don't know if it's
so
because they're
bad.
so reliant
because they
on.
don't exactly, and they don't even know basic world history. If they knew and I had to tell the guy, look, dude, you are clueless about firstly the history of that region, and also you seem to be clueless about the history of like this jihadi thing is a very real threat, and it's been around for a very long time.
Well, for one, I think he's being hyperbolic with his Facebook post about like
he was trying to make
that comparison is kind of
that's not even accurate. And
Yeah.
I said, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, there are many places where it's like jihadi central, that there is no US imperialism. Western imperialism is wrongly blamed for things that happen in the Middle East and the subcontinent. I'm sorry, it was there way before the US even existed. So this
Yeah,
is
I don't
where
think
this
that
is
they
like
helped.
the
I
biggest
was I
fault
will
line.
say that I don't think the U.S. helped getting involved in it.
No, it
At
didn't help,
all. But
and for 70 years, when it continues to fund and aid like a country like Pakistan that basically brews these terrorists, it and this is knowing well that they're killing their own people in Afghanistan. Like, at what point do you sort of wake up and say, these are bad hombres, they're not our allies. Why are we giving them billions for our own US troops to be killed in Afghanistan by them? Or, like, I don't know, you don't have to be some genius to figure out that that's a bad idea.
well,
But for 70 years
on
they've
the
done.
other side of that, it's why are we here in the United States sending people over there to play like this referee
that
policing
whole thing, and also
entity?
the opioids, and I mean that's a
Right,
separate
the
issue. I
opioids,
think
yeah, of course.
that's a side problem. The main problem is
That's a
like
pretty big
not
problem,
even realizing history. So I
Yeah.
think yes, the US, I would say their blame is bad foreign policy and not calling
course, yeah.
out the bad
Well,
actors.
it's all
I
about
wouldn't
resources
say
too. It's about
they're not the source of the problems. Yeah.
well, I don't know if I agree completely with that, but I will say this. It's all about resources, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
China doing their,
Yeah.
New Silk Road thing.
Yeah.
It's about securing the most resources so that they could be the dominant powers. I think India,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, would agree that they also would probably participate in that. They probably do. I don't know at what level.
No.
but
I
every
have to make
country
this very
does.
no. This is a very important point. India is the only country in that region that has not taken part in the BRI. It is, if I can, I mean, this is a big deal.
No, I
And
understand
it
that they're
made-
not taking part in the BRI, but in other ways, I'm sure every country, not just India, but I'm saying that every country
Yeah.
participates in some kind of, method
Like
of
proxy
securing
stuff, you
resources
mean?
that they've gotten. So whether it's in Afghanistan
Yes,
or
but
other parts of the world.
but India doesn't get billions of aid from the US, and also we I think they are rogue actors, and then they are countries that are genuinely developing or genuinely good countries, and I think there needs to be a distinction. You can't, like, there are these, like, what Pakistan has done for 70 years with its terror economy. I mean, their whole economy the whole nation is actually run by the army, for the army, of the army. It is like, the sad thing is that, I'll have these discussions with Americans who don't know this stuff, and they have such a naive kind of opinion about it. And then they are trying to target other sort of countries that are not even bad to begin with, and you just think you have got to get this part of history right. Like, you have to be educated on the Middle East and the subcontinent, because you're talking about billions of people, and these are historical facts, right? Nobody's making anything up. These are like, and if you work for the US government, or if you're, I mean, it depends on where you are in the army, you will know about what the story is, and you need to wake up. And I find people on the left are just, this is like their huge blind spot, and they just keep getting closer. They keep, they doing the China apologetics is one thing, but then they keep getting closer to also all the brotherhood, and then like CARE and all these, they get closer, and that now you have Congress people who are in, like, it just, there's no end to it. So
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
I would agree with you on that. Like, I'm not an expert on international affairs. I'm not an expert on what's going on with India and Pakistan. It seems a little bit odd to me from my perspective, having them been, literal neighbors in the same country at one point, and now being kind of neighboring countries. It's an interesting dynamic. I hope that it's resolved in a peaceful manner. I don't think either of us wants to see a violent
it's not
end to
a
it.
it's okay. I think, again, this is another one of those things where somehow the West doesn't understand what happened. 70 years ago, they were one country. The Muslim population wanted their own state, and so we gave them their own state. They got their own state. That state is called Pakistan. Now, the issue is not every Muslim went there. Most did, some didn't. 2% didn't. Now that 2% has become 200 million in India, and we have a lot of communal problems because of that. But then the people who did go there, so that's Pakistan, and we don't have a problem. I think past 1947, we've moved on to bigger and better things, to be like some kind of global force to reckon with, but they are still bent on that time, I think they haven't moved on from 1947. And I really think they have an identity crisis because 70 years ago, they didn't exist, right? So
Yeah.
we have
Well,
a
yeah, it's a
6,000-year-old
rather new
civilization
country.
to lean back on. They have nothing. They have 70 years of zero identity, and
Well, they're
their identity is that they're not India. So
yeah.
when you have zero identity,
Well, I don't know.
you get pimped around.
Yeah. So I don't know about all that because, like, they're very smart people. I mean, they have a nuclear program. I don't think we can
No, but
undermine a
again,
country
where did
like
that? No, but I think it's not about like I'm not. I think I've had so many frustrating conversations with sort of these so-called progressives on this topic where I'll share the history with them and they don't, like, number one, they don't do research, they don't read, they don't go back, like this stuff is all out there, right? But they don't bother actually understanding what happened, why it happened, and they somehow kind of they try to shield it. And like that, I'm not talking about like, oh yeah, there's a few good, like that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, you have to look at the state, the nature of the state, what they're doing in Afghanistan, what they've done, for 70 years, and their ethos is very different. And where did they get nukes from? I mean, it wasn't like.
Well, I'm certainly not doing apologetics for Pakistan.
The funding came from the U.S. They were some. You guys had some horrible presidents who went out of their way to sort of aid, right? And now
look.
look.
I'm not trying to do apologetics for Pakistan.
Yeah.
Let's look at it this way too. Obama went into Pakistan. Guess who was taken out there in Pakistan? Osama bin Laden was taken out and killed in Pakistan, at least in the bordering area of Pakistan.
Yeah, but
it's not like the U.S. is like sheltering Pakistan either.
They were for a long time, and I think certain sections, even today, I mean, you can see it. It's very. I don't have to. I mean, it's very blatant. They are, within the party, especially you look at the DNC, there are many factions who.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah, there are many factions that play apologetics for Islamic, radicals.
Yeah, but
I won't deny that. And that's the frustrating part to me is that I can be, and the same thing with China. I can be for a Medicare for all program that's a single payer program, advocate for it at the top of my lungs, and still not play apologetics for China and be very critical, because that's an authoritarian country. No matter how you look at it. And it's not really communism. It's a, quasi-communist, capitalist dictatorship. It runs business like Russia, very capitalist driven, but also very authoritarian. So I can be critical of this. I don't understand it. Look, I don't understand it at the end of the day, why they do that. Maybe it's because they're hungry to adopt all these multicultural, immigrant communities that are coming into the United States, and they see that as their opportunity to gain electoral power and dominance.
Vote bank politics with the left around the world, they look at these persecuted minorities as a vote bank. It happens even in India. The left Congress party in India, they have appeased the
I agree with that to an extent. Yeah, I agree with that. And the Republic, just like the Republican Party courts the religious figures, just like they're all playing the game. And the left
does it also with care and all that. Same thing, right? It's these sort of over appeasing of certain groups, over pandering to them, and like even Bernie did that, right?
Well, that's something that I've talked about before too, where it's like that a lot of these Islamist groups aren't leftists. They don't agree with your leftist ideas.
They're like the opposite
you simply
of
are looking
liberal
at them,
values.
Yeah, it's like you're looking at them because of their minority status and color, which
and
to
it's
me is more insulting.
You're right. And I just want to say supposed persecution. Like, I'm sorry, but in every Muslim majority country, they are a majority, right? So when people mostly Muslim immigrants come from Muslim majority countries where they are not persecuted, they are not a minority. The only country where there would be a minority is actually, ironically, in India, where they have the best life. Muslims, I think, have a better life in India than they do in Pakistan, which is an Islamic republic. So go figure.
Well, like I said, I'm not going to comment too much on that. I don't know too much about that, but I will tell you this: identity is a big problem here in the United States. The politic playing, the dividing. All of that is a big problem. If Muslim communities here are more conservative and they want to join the Republican Party, I know a lot of Indian friends of mine here in the United States who are Indian Americans living here in California, different areas.
Yeah.
Very conservative. very, very pro-Republican.
Because a fiscal policy, because they work hard, they're good people, they stay out of the prison system, and they want lower taxes, they want a better fiscal policy for small businesses. That's about as
and there
conservative as
are
they get.
also some who are left-leaning, and they're going to side more with democratic values, liberal values, which is
right.
fine. That's all fine. And I do have, like I said, I agree with you where it's an issue. Don't go after them just because of the minority thing. You know, it's like this cultural diversity versus racial diversity.
Intersectional.
We're okay
exactly.
with. It's like we're okay with racial diversity as long as you culturally align with what we want. And I think sometimes the left is guilty of something like this, where it's like, or the opposite of this actually, where they're just kind of trying to get these numbers. But then there's all this contention within because, you know, you're throwing out this big tent idea, and a lot of these groups don't agree with you. It creates conflict. The right is a little bit better at that, like uniformity of like, you know, we're welcoming, but we also have these principles. Maybe it's their conservatism that drives them to do something like that. But anyways, go ahead. I'll give you the last word on all of this.
Yes.
The wrap up. I think this has been a very interesting conversation, as we always have.
This is
here.
like the most engaging conversation we've had. For sure. But like, I'm so glad that you touched on these things, because this is like at the heart of what is wrong with the DNC right now. And I think they are so immersed in it that they don't even see, and they have so much venom towards the other side that they don't even realize that this stuff is festering like a cancer within. And it, you know what cancer does, it ends up consuming itself, right? And I see that happening. And as an outsider, I just kind of urge people to do some soul searching and to take a step back and see what's happening, because I think at least from my perspective, like this Indian American community has been really rattled and disrespected, I think, in the last few years or year, I would say, because of all of this. We have felt
you just have to look at Tulsi Gabbard's
Yeah.
campaign
Yeah.
to understand
And
the viciousness
absolutely.
that they went
And then
after the Hindu.
and they just kept double downing on everything that was wrong, and instead of trying to make some decent amends. And I think that's why I'm not a fan of this Marxist view, worldview, which is so dangerous when you start looking at just its groups, you know, and then it's just the whole thing just explodes. But look, I think this pandemic has been an eye-opener for everyone. I'm very pleased that, you know, India has taken a step up, and I think it will continue to do that with, you know, and I think in the UN also they're going to have an increased role, and post-COVID as well. I mean, I hope they get to take some of the benefits from the fallout that comes with China. I'm sure there will be a supply chain fallout, and they will take, it's already happening, they will take some of that. I hope they take as much of that as possible. And I just want to see a country that remains intact, you know, with everything, because I think every country is very vulnerable, and we're all going to be hit. I just hope that we keep our values and survive and our ethos intact. And I just want to see more humanitarianism, because this is the time when spirituality and humanitarianism actually matters. Not during the good times, but during these times. Like, when does it matter to speak about love and light and to act like that? Well, it's now where people need it. And I think we live in a deeply divided country and world, and I think we need to unify and come together, and this is the only way.
No, I agree with you, and I definitely, you know, wish all the best to every country, including China, including India, including Pakistan. Look, you know, everybody, all these countries have their beefs. A lot of the problems, I think, stem from these big conglomerate bureaucratic organizations that just drive division. And, you know, here in the United States, I do think that, you know, the Democratic Party drives a lot of this too. Republicans don't go without blame either. They also contribute to it. So hopefully, hey, food and politics, when we start doing these segments, maybe we can actually have a meal next time, and our schedules will align, and everything, the stars will align, and we'll be able to actually do something interesting with this series. But awesome conversation as always, Priti Upala. You can find her on YouTube. You can find her all over the internet. On Twitter, go ahead and give out just your information that you want people to know about.
Yes. Thank you. And maybe in the description section, I'll send you my link to my channel, so you can put that there.
Absolutely,
people can click it directly. My Twitter handle, I'll give it to you, but it's Preeti Upala with 2 U's. Find me on Facebook. Instagram is Preeti U. And please, check out my channel. Email me, contact me, just reach out, because I'm just available. I want to hear your opinions. And if you do know about sort of foreign policy and all, please share your views with me. I'm always open. And I want to see what sort of discourse is out there,
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to see more and more people are waking up to seeing what's going on. So I thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy as always. And I look forward to the next episode where we'll make a meal.
Yes, hopefully that'll come up soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you follow news and politics. Comment down below. Very interested to hear your guys' thought. And thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.